The alien slavers of the Zareth Dominion had conquered hundreds of species, breaking them, forcing them into servitude. They believed themselves invincible. No race had ever resisted them for long, not the six-armed Tolvar, not the towering Grokhan, not even the hyper-intelligent Violari. Every civilization they touched fell to chains. So when they captured a single human, they thought little of it. The human had been found drifting in a ruined escape pod, the wreckage of a destroyed colony ship floating nearby. A routine salvage operation turned into an opportunity, another body for the labor pits. A species unregistered in their databases, which meant they had no interstellar allies to come looking. The perfect slave. The human, a male, was thrown into the gladiator pens of Zareth Prime, a world where broken slaves fought to entertain their masters. They called him Specimen 734 and expected him to die within a cycle, either in the arenas or from the brutal conditioning. But he did not die. At first, the slavers barely noticed. Humans were fragile things, soft-fleshed and weak-limbed compared to the towering warriors of the Zareth. They dismissed his survival as mere luck. Then came the fights. The human should have been slaughtered by the first beast he faced, a massive, tusked varul with skin like iron and claws sharp enough to tear through steel. Instead, he adapted. He learned the creature's movements, its patterns, its weaknesses, and then he killed it. Not with brute force, not with the desperate luck of a cornered beast, but with tactics, with intelligence, with patience. That was when the Zareth first realized something was wrong. Over the next cycles, the human continued to win, not just in the arena, but outside of it. He spoke to the other slaves. He listened. He learned their languages, their histories, their suffering. And he began to whisper. The Zareth were a species built on fear. They ruled by crushing all hope before it could bloom. But this human, this one insignificant specimen, was planting seeds of defiance in every broken heart. The guards started noticing changes. Slaves who had been obedient for years now looked at them with something different in their eyes. The fights in the arenas became more brutal, but the human never lost. Then one day, he vanished. The slavers searched for him frantically, tearing apart the slave quarters, interrogating every prisoner. He was nowhere to be found. Panic spread through the ranks. How could a single slave disappear from the most secure fortress in the Dominion? It took them 3 days to realize what had happened. The human had not escaped. He had moved. He had infiltrated the weapons depot. He had armed the slaves. And he had started a war. The rebellion began within the heart of Zareth Prime, but it did not stop there. Because this human was not just a survivor, not just a fighter. He was a soldier. And he had told the others what humans had always done best, what had allowed them to rise, to conquer, to endure. Humanity did not break under chains. They shattered them, and they made sure their enemies paid for ever trying. The uprising spread across the Dominion like wildfire. Enslaved warriors from dozens of species turned against their masters, armed with stolen weapons and led by the human who had once been nothing more than a nameless prisoner. The Zareth fought back. But they were used to battling fragmented, fearful rebels. They were not prepared for an enemy who could strategize, who could lead. World after world fell. The human taught his allies not just to fight, but to win. To strike where it hurt the most. Supply chains were severed. Communication networks collapsed. Zareth generals were assassinated in their own chambers. By the time the Dominion realized the true scale of their mistake, it was too late. The human, now known by the name the other freed slaves had given him, the Harbinger, stood at the gates of the Zareth homeworld itself, and he gave them one chance. "Surrender," he said, voice broadcast across the stars, or be erased. They refused. So he showed them what humanity did to those who tried to put them in chains. The war lasted 7 days. The Dominion lasted none. And when the dust settled, when the last of the Zareth warlords were dragged from their palaces and cast before those they had once enslaved, the galaxy understood one thing with absolute clarity. They had enslaved a human, and in doing so, they had doomed their entire species. The Zareth Dominion, once feared across the galaxy, was no more. Its once mighty fleets lay in ruins, its rulers reduced to prisoners awaiting judgment. But the war was not over. The Harbinger stood on the bridge of a captured Zareth dreadnought, staring at the holographic display of the galaxy. He could see the chaos unfolding beyond the Dominion's borders. Power vacuums never remained empty for long. The Dominion had not simply ruled by force. It had controlled trade routes, diplomatic ties, and resource distributions across entire sectors. Without it, warlords, opportunists, and rival empires were already beginning to tear at the remains, eager to carve out their own pieces of what was left. And the former slaves, the ones who had fought, bled, and died for their freedom, stood at the edge of a precipice. "Your orders, Harbinger?" asked Captain Threx, a Grokon warrior who had once been a pit fighter like himself. Now he commanded a fleet. He was one of many who had risen under the humans' leadership. The Harbinger studied the holomap. The war had started as vengeance, as survival. But now it was something else. The Zareth had ruled because they were strong. The galaxy understood strength. Without it, chaos would consume everything. A choice had to be made. Would they simply be victors of a rebellion? Or would they become something greater? He looked at the faces of his commanders, alien warriors from a dozen species, all of them waiting for his decision. The Harbinger took a deep breath. "We rebuild," he said, "not just for ourselves, for everyone the Zareth ever enslaved. We will not allow another empire to rise in their place." Threx nodded. "And what of the remaining Zareth?" The Harbinger's expression darkened. The Zareth had shown no mercy to the species they had conquered. Billions had died under their rule. Now, the galaxy demanded justice. "Gather them," he said. "The leaders, the generals, the slavers. They will answer for what they have done." The word spread quickly. The freed worlds cheered as the last of the Zareth rulers were dragged from their hiding places, brought before the people they had once enslaved. The trials lasted weeks. Some called for their execution. Others demanded they be enslaved in return, forced to suffer as their victims had. But the Harbinger knew that vengeance alone would not build the future they needed. When the trials ended, a decision was made. The worst of the Zareth, the slavers, the torturers, the warlords, were executed. Their empire was erased from history, their homeworld stripped of its power, its people scattered. But for the rest, exile. The Zareth as a species were not wiped out, but they would never rise again, never rebuild, never be allowed to claim power. They had ruled through fear. Now they would know what it meant to live in fear. With the war over, the real challenge began. The Harbinger and his people had to rebuild a shattered galaxy. But as he stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as former slaves built something new, something better, he knew one thing for certain. They had been forged in chains, and now they would shape the stars themselves. But unknown to them, deep in the uncharted void of space, something watched. Something ancient. Something that had seen the rise and fall of countless empires. And for the first time in millennia, it took notice of humanity. The galaxy was changing. The fall of the Zareth Dominion had shattered the balance of power, and in its place, something new was rising. The Harbinger and his forces, once nothing more than escaped slaves and scattered rebels, had become something more than just victors. They were rulers now, not conquerors, not slavers, but leaders of a new order. They called it the Accord, a coalition of liberated worlds, bound together not by fear, but by unity. The Harbinger had seen firsthand what unchecked power could do, how tyranny thrived when the strong preyed upon the weak. He would not let that happen again. But not everyone shared his vision. Warlords, pirates, and remnants of the Zareth's old allies refused to bow to the new order. They raided supply lines, ambushed Accord ships, and spread whispers of rebellion. The Harbinger had expected resistance. What he hadn't expected was the message. It came from deep space, far beyond the old Dominion's borders, a signal encrypted in a way no known species used, and it carried a warning. You have their attention. We are watching. We will see if you survive. The words sent a chill through the command staff. No identifier, no explanation, just a cold, impersonal statement. The Harbinger frowned as he studied the transmission. It wasn't a threat, not exactly. It was something worse. It was observation. Someone, something, was watching them. For the next several weeks, reports began coming in. Accord ships on deep space patrols went missing. Entire settlements, once abandoned, now bore strange signs of activity, tools left behind, energy signatures that faded before they could be traced. Then came the first true encounter. A recon ship, scouting the edges of uncharted space, found something impossible. An ancient vessel, derelict but intact, floating in the void. It predated every known civilization. Its surface was covered in markings, unreadable but eerily precise, as though they had been grown rather than etched. The crew sent a drone inside. They received only a few seconds of footage before the signal cut out. A corridor, stretching endlessly, walls that seemed to pulse, as if alive. And then, a figure. Not mechanical, not biological, something in between, and as the drone's feed collapsed into static, the crew heard a sound, a voice, layered and distant, whispering in their minds. You were not meant to rise. Then the ship vanished. The Harbinger stood before his advisors, staring at the last transmission, his mind racing. The Zareth had thought themselves the masters of the galaxy. They had enslaved species, crushed civilizations under their heel. But they had never encountered this. This was older, greater. And now, it was watching humanity. The Harbinger took a slow breath. The Accord had just won their first war. But it seemed they had only awakened something far worse. The Accord had barely begun to take shape when the first true sign of the Watchers appeared. A fleet. No, a shadow of a fleet, drifted at the edge of known space. Not Zareth, not pirates, not anything in the Accord's vast database of known civilizations. The ships were massive, impossibly sleek, their surfaces shifting like liquid metal. They hung in the void, silent, unmoving, as if studying the stars themselves. And then, one of them moved. It drifted toward an Accord outpost on the edge of the old Dominion's territory. The station's sensors flared to life, scrambling to scan the vessel, but found nothing. No energy readings, no heat signatures. It was there, but it wasn't. Then the station went dark. No alarms, no distress signals, just silence. By the time an Accord patrol arrived, there was nothing left. No wreckage, no bodies. The station was simply gone. The Harbinger stood on the bridge of his command ship, staring at the empty void where the station had once been. His officers whispered theories, cloaking technology, teleportation, some unknown weapon. But the Harbinger knew better. This was not an attack. This was a message. 2 days later, the Watchers spoke again. Another signal. No source, no location, just a voice, rippling through every Accord transmission. You were not meant to rise. You walk where others have fallen. You build upon graves long forgotten. The Harbinger clenched his fists. He had led a war against the Zareth. He had built an empire out of ruins. And now something beyond his understanding was telling him that humanity's ascension was a mistake. He would not accept that. "Send a reply," he ordered. His communications officer hesitated. "Sir, we don't even know where to send it." "Send it everywhere," the Harbinger said. His voice was calm, but there was fire in his eyes. When he spoke, his message echoed across every Accord frequency, broadcast into the void itself. "We were slaves once. We were broken, but we rose. And if you believe we do not belong here, come and prove it." The silence that followed was deafening. The crew waited. Hours passed. No response. Then, deep in the void, something moved. The Watchers were coming. The first attack came without warning. An Accord colony, Valrith 7, vanished overnight. No distress signals, no explosions, no battle. One day, it was a thriving settlement. The next, it was an empty husk. Buildings stood untouched, supply caches remained full, but there were no people. No bodies, no traces of a struggle. 30,000 souls gone without a trace. The Harbinger wasted no time. He mobilized the fleet, deploying scout ships to the edges of Accord space. Every patrol was doubled. Every sensor array was recalibrated to detect even the faintest anomaly. And still, the Watchers remained unseen, until the Retribution vanished. It was one of the Accord's finest warships, a battlecruiser bristling with weapons. It had been sent to investigate the colony's disappearance. Its last transmission was a garbled mess, fragments of panicked voices, alarms blaring. Then a final message from its captain, voice shaking with something the Harbinger had never heard before. "Fear. They are here. They are inside. We were never—" Silence. The Harbinger did not sleep that night. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A science vessel, the Eos, had been analyzing the last known location of the Retribution when they found something. A footprint in space itself. It wasn't a traditional ship's energy signature. It was something else. A distortion. A warping of reality, as if space had been stretched, twisted in a way physics did not allow. And within that distortion, they found something small, insignificant. A single piece of metal. When they brought it aboard for analysis, the ship's AI refused to identify it. The onboard systems, advanced beyond anything the old Dominion had possessed, simply shut down whenever they tried to scan it. It was wrong. Then the Eos received a transmission, not from an outside source, from inside the ship. The crew gathered around as the message appeared on their monitors, written in an unknown language, yet every single person understood its meaning. "You should not have touched it." Then the lights flickered. Then the screaming started. By the time an Accord strike team arrived, the Eos was adrift. Not a single soul remained aboard. But the ship wasn't empty. The Harbinger watched from the bridge of his flagship as the first recon team boarded. Their helmet feeds streamed back to the fleet, showing dark corridors, flickering lights, shadows that moved when no one was looking. Then one of the soldiers turned a corner and froze. There, in the center of the hallway, was a figure. No, not a figure. A distortion. A wound in space itself, shaped almost like something humanoid. And then it spoke. Not through the comms, not through any system. It spoke inside their minds. "You were never meant to leave your cradle." The Harbinger felt a chill crawl up his spine. For the first time in his life, he realized something terrible. The war against the Zareth had been nothing. The Accord was nothing. Because something else had already decided the fate of this galaxy long before humanity had ever left Earth. And now they had noticed him. The Harbinger had faced war. He had faced slavery, rebellion, and the fall of empires. He had built the Accord from the ashes of tyranny. But this was something different. The Watchers weren't invaders in the way the Zareth had been. They didn't send fleets. They didn't demand surrender. They erased. The Eos was gone. Not destroyed, not disabled. Gone. A drifting husk with no crew, no signs of struggle, just the whisper of a presence that should not exist. And then the disappearances began again. Stations, ships, entire colonies. Not all at once, not in great battles, just one by one, vanishing into nothing. The Harbinger stood in the war room of his flagship, the Vanguard, watching the galaxy map flicker with new losses. His top commanders surrounded him, aliens from a dozen different species, warriors who had survived the fall of the Zareth Dominion, who had fought and bled for the Accord. And yet, now, there was something in the air none of them had ever felt before. Doubt. "They are not fighting a war," said Threx, his most trusted officer. "They are culling us." The word settled heavily over the room. The Harbinger exhaled slowly. "Then we need to strike back." Silence. Finally, one of the strategists, a Velari tactician named Relis, shook her head. "Against what? We have no fleets to target, no strongholds to siege, no weaknesses to exploit." She was right. Every great war in history had followed a pattern: conquest, resistance, counterattack. But this enemy had no front lines, no territory. It was as if they existed outside of reality itself, stepping in only when necessary, to correct something. Like exterminators purging a pest infestation, like gods pruning a mistake. A cold thought crept into the Harbinger's mind. The Zareth had enslaved and brutalized entire species, conquering without mercy. And yet the Watchers had never intervened. But the moment humanity rose, the moment he had reshaped the galaxy, they came, they watched, and they whispered, "You were not meant to rise." Why? Why humanity? His fingers curled into fists. It didn't matter. He would not kneel. He would not let the Accord crumble into nothingness. If the Watchers wanted to erase them, they would have to fight for it. The Harbinger turned to his fleet commanders. His voice was calm, but there was fire beneath it. "We hunt them." Threx narrowed his reptilian eyes. "Hunt what, exactly?" The Harbinger stepped toward the holographic display. The strange, untraceable distortions left behind whenever a colony vanished. The eerie transmissions, the warping of space itself. "We find the places they've touched. We follow the patterns. We set traps." His eyes burned with something primal. "They think we don't belong here. Let's show them how wrong they are." It started with bait, a false colony, empty but with all the signs of life. A fabricated settlement, heat signatures mimicking a population, ships moving in carefully scripted patterns. Then they waited. Days passed, then weeks, and then just when doubt began to creep in, it happened. The colony vanished, but this time the Vanguard was watching. Sensors captured the impossible, a hole in reality, a rippling distortion swallowing the settlement like a great maw. The moment it closed, the fleet was already moving, tracking the aftershocks, chasing the impossible. And they found it. A void, a space between space and within it, a structure, not a planet, not a station, something older, something vast, something that should not exist. The Harbinger stared at the image before him, his heart pounding. They had found the home of the Watchers, and now, for the first time in history, humanity was coming for them. The Accord fleet hovered at the edge of the void, engines silent, weapons primed. Before them stretched something beyond comprehension, a structure, but also not. It shifted like a mirage, its shape twisting, bending in ways that defied physics. The home of the Watchers. The Harbinger stood at the command deck of the Vanguard, his fists clenched behind his back. He had spent his life fighting tyrants, shattering empires. Now he faced something that had never been challenged before, and he was about to knock on their front door. "Weapons ready," Threx growled beside him. The Grokon warrior's massive frame was rigid with tension. "We strike first, hit them hard before they can—" "They already see us," Relis interrupted. Her voice was hushed, almost reverent. "They've always seen us." The Harbinger knew she was right. This wasn't a surprise attack. This was an intrusion, and the Watchers did not tolerate intrusions. The moment the fleet moved forward, reality broke. 1 second, the void was empty. The next, they were everywhere. The Watchers did not arrive with ships. They became the battlefield. Space itself twisted as their presence unfurled. They weren't machines. They weren't biological. They were something else. Shadows that pulsed with unnatural energy, shifting forms that flickered between dimensions. And then, without warning, they struck. The first Accord destroyer, the Resolute, vanished. Not destroyed, not damaged, simply ceased to exist. Alarms blared across the fleet, weapons fired, but the shots passed through the Watchers as if they weren't real. Until suddenly they were, and then they weren't, shifting between existence like a cruel joke. The Harbinger gritted his teeth. He had expected resistance. He had not expected to fight ghosts. "Redirect targeting to ion fields," he ordered. "If they shift out of phase, we box them in." The fleet adapted. Instead of trying to destroy the Watchers outright, they surrounded them, trapping them in bursts of energy fields. The Watchers faltered, not used to resistance, not used to being hunted, and for the first time, they reacted. A voice rippling through every mind in the fleet. "You do not understand. You defy the order. You are a mistake that must be corrected." The Harbinger snarled. "Funny, that's what the Zareth said too." And then he gave the order. Fire. The battle was unlike anything recorded in galactic history. The Watchers were not an army. They were a force, something ancient, something woven into the fabric of reality itself. But the Harbinger had built an army from nothing before. He had turned slaves into warriors, rebels into conquerors, and now he was turning ghosts into prey. Coordinated energy pulses struck the Watchers, forcing them into form, making them real, and real things could die. One by one, the Watchers began to falter. One by one, they fell. The void trembled. The structure ahead of them began to shift, pulsing erratically, as if afraid. For the first time, the Watchers spoke with something almost like desperation. "You do not understand what you awaken. There are worse things than us." The Harbinger stared at the impossible structure ahead. A gateway, a lock, a secret that had been buried for eons. He knew fear when he heard it, and the Watchers, these godlike beings, were afraid. He exhaled slowly. "Then maybe," he murmured, "we're just getting started." The battle was over. The Watchers had retreated. The Accord had done the impossible. They had made the Predators flee. And now the gateway lay before them, untouched for millennia. Threx stepped forward. "What are your orders?" The Harbinger stared into the shifting abyss beyond the gate. The Watchers had tried to erase humanity because of what was waiting on the other side, and he needed to know why. "Prepare a team," he said. "We're going in." The gateway loomed before them, pulsing with a strange, shifting light. It wasn't just an object. It was alive, or at least something close to it. A vast construct of impossible geometry, built by forces that had shaped the galaxy before any known species had even crawled from their homeworlds. The Watchers had tried to keep them away from it. That alone was reason enough to step inside. The Harbinger led the team himself. Aboard the Vanguard, he had commanded fleets, shattered empires, built a new order. But this was unknown territory. He needed to see it firsthand. His team was small, only the best. Threx, his Grokon second in command, towering and bristling with weapons. Relis, the Velari tactician, her mind sharper than any blade. Kara, the human engineer, the only one who had successfully studied the Watcher's tech without losing her mind. And a handful of others, warriors, scientists, all prepared for the impossible. Together they stepped forward, and the void swallowed them whole. For a moment there was nothing. No sound, no light, no sensation. Then, they existed again. The team staggered, weapons raised, scanning their surroundings. They were standing inside a vast cathedral-like structure, stretching endlessly into the darkness. The walls shimmered, shifting like liquid metal, whispering in a language no one could hear. "This place," Relis breathed. "It's ancient." The Harbinger moved forward. Every step echoed. He could feel something watching them. Not like the Watchers before. This was deeper, older. And then, the walls moved. Figures emerged, tall, impossibly thin, their bodies stretching like shadows. Not the Watchers, something else. They did not attack. They simply stood there. Then, one of them spoke. Its voice was not sound. It was inside them, vibrating in their bones. "You are not the first." The Harbinger narrowed his eyes. "Then tell me, who came before?" The figure tilted its head, as if considering him. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it raised a long, clawed hand. And reality itself twisted. They were no longer in the cathedral. They were standing on a battlefield. Not just any battlefield. The battlefield. The last stand of an empire older than history, a war that had been wiped from time itself. The sky burned. Ships clashed in the void, shattering like glass, and in the center of it all, towering over the carnage, a figure, a being of pure darkness, shifting and writhing, consuming everything in its path. It was not the Watchers. It was worse. It was the reason the Watchers existed in the first place. The whispering figure turned to the Harbinger, and for the first time, he understood. The Watchers were not gods. They were not the ultimate force in the galaxy. They were the keepers, the ones who had held the line against this for eons. And when humanity had shattered the old order, when the Harbinger had defied them, he had broken the last seal. The true enemy was awake now, and it was hungry. The vision ended as suddenly as it had begun. The Harbinger and his team were back inside the cathedral-like structure, gasping for breath. But they were not the same. They had seen. The Watchers had not been humanity's enemy. They had been the last defense, the dam holding back something far worse. A force so ancient, so vast, that even the Zareth's cruelty, even the Watchers' cold indifference, paled in comparison. Something that devoured. Something that had wiped out civilizations before them. And now, it knew humanity existed. The Harbinger turned to the shadowed figure before him, his pulse steady despite the horror burning in his mind. "You should have told us." The figure's voice echoed through his skull. "You would not have listened." He couldn't argue. He had spent his life breaking chains, defying gods and masters alike. But now? Now he had invited something into the galaxy that no fleet could stop. Threx gripped his weapon. "What do we do?" The Harbinger exhaled slowly. There was no time for regret. No time for guilt. If the Watchers had spent eons barely holding this thing back, then there was only one path forward. He turned to his team, to the warriors and leaders who had followed him through the fires of revolution. We do what humanity has always done. His voice was calm, steel beneath the storm. We fight. The vanguard emerged from the void, returning to real space, battered but intact. The Accord fleet was waiting. The moment they arrived, transmissions flooded in. Distress calls, alarms, reports of strange attacks across the sector. The Harbinger closed his eyes. It had already begun. The Watchers had tried to contain it. They had failed. Now, humanity and its allies would have to face the real war. He turned to his fleet, his people, the survivors of a broken empire standing on the edge of oblivion. This isn't just about us anymore, he said, his voice echoing through every comm channel. This is bigger than humanity, bigger than the Accord. This is about survival. A pause. Then, if the galaxy wants to live, it fights with us. Across the fleet, warriors and leaders from a dozen species stood, their faces grim, their weapons ready. The vanguard powered up its engines, and with humanity at the helm, the war for existence began. The cold void of space wasn't supposed to feel this suffocating, but right now, it did. The Kevlani Armada, a ruthless alien empire spanning hundreds of worlds, had finally made their move. Humanity had been a thorn in their side for decades, resisting every diplomatic strong-arm, every technological embargo, and even surviving their covert sabotage attempts. But this time, they weren't playing games. They had come in force. A fleet of 30 war-class dreadnoughts loomed just outside Juno 3, one of Earth's most crucial deep space colonies. 100,000 souls lived here. Miners, scientists, families. And now, they were surrounded. Inside the colony's command bunker, Admiral Vasquez stood over the holographic display, her eyes scanning the fleet formations with the calculating gaze of a predator rather than prey. A group of officers murmured around her, their nerves evident. "This isn't a blockade," said Commander Rourke, his voice tense. "This is a chokehold. They're not here to negotiate. They're here to end us." Vasquez didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to Dr. Hayes, the lead scientist in Juno 3's defense division. "Can we activate the cage?" Hayes hesitated. "It's untested. If it fails, we die anyway," Vasquez cut in. "Do it." The cage was a theoretical countermeasure, a desperate attempt at turning human ingenuity into a last-ditch defense mechanism. The Kevlani had superior firepower, but humans adapted. As Hayes rushed to implement the activation sequence, a deep, guttural voice echoed through the bunker's speakers. "Humans of Juno 3, you are hereby subjects of the Kevlani Dominion. Surrender, and your deaths will be painless. Resist, and we will erase your existence from the stars." The voice belonged to Grand Warlord Tarvok, the Butcher of the Serath Nebula, a warlord who had personally overseen the extermination of entire planetary civilizations. Vasquez smirked. She tapped a command into the console, activating the colony's wide-range communicator. "Tarvok, you really don't know humans, do you?" she said, her voice cool and composed. There was a brief silence before a response came, this time laced with amusement. "Your courage is wasted, Admiral. Your species is overmatched, outgunned, and cornered. You cannot win." Vasquez's smirk deepened. "Oh, we know. That's why we're not playing to win." She pressed a button, and the cage activated. Juno 3's entire planetary grid hummed to life, sending a massive electromagnetic pulse rippling outward. Not just a standard EMP, but a specialized gravitic distortion pulse designed to interfere with the Kevlani's phase drives. Tarvok's fleet suddenly lurched in space. The graceful, predatory movement of their ships came to an abrupt halt. Panic crackled through their communication channels as their navigation systems short-circuited. Vasquez turned to Rourke. "Now, we flip the script." "Roger that," Rourke said, barking orders to the gunnery officers. Juno 3's defenses were nothing compared to a Kevlani war fleet, but the colony had one thing the enemy never considered: a fleet of civilian ships rigged for war. Cargo haulers, mining vessels, even personal transporters. Every last one of them had been secretly modified with weapons, armor, and countermeasures. This wasn't just a colony. It was a trap. The first volley of missiles launched from Juno 3's surface, targeting the dreadnought's now vulnerable hulls. The Kevlani were used to overwhelming their enemies. They had never been put on the defensive before. Explosions rippled across the enemy fleet, smaller ships breaking apart as their shields collapsed. The Kevlani scrambled to adjust, but without their phase drives, they couldn't maneuver out of the colony's range. Tarvok's voice returned, now furious. "You insolent filth! You dare—" "Oh, we do more than dare!" Vasquez cut him off. "We prepare!" The colony's hidden boarding parties launched next. Small, fast-moving vessels packed with Special Forces operatives trained in counter-Kevlani warfare. They latched onto the enemy ships like leeches, cutting into their hulls and unleashing trained human soldiers into their corridors. The battle was chaos. Tarvok hadn't just underestimated human tactics. He had underestimated our sheer refusal to die quietly. The Kevlani thought they had trapped humanity. They had no idea they had just walked into the biggest mistake of their lives. The Kevlani dreadnought Sovereign Wrath burned in the void, its sleek black hull scarred by unexpected damage. Fires raged in the corridors, alarms blaring in a language that, until now, had never known panic. Human boarding teams moved like ghosts through the wreckage, their weapons sharp, their purpose sharper. Tarvok stood at the center of his warship's command deck, claws digging into the armrest of his throne. His yellow eyes burned with rage as he watched his fleet struggle, their formations broken, their superiority meaningless in the chaos humanity had unleashed. "Status," he barked. His second-in-command, Vorkal, bared his fangs in frustration. "The human pulse disrupted our phase drives. Our dreadnoughts are trapped in normal space until we can recalibrate. The enemy is using improvised vessels to attack weak points in our hulls. It is unconventional," Tarvok snarled. That word, unconventional, it was the only true advantage humanity had ever had. They were weaker, slower, less advanced, but time and time again they refused to fight properly. They never accepted they had already lost, and that made them dangerous. "Redirect all firepower to the colony's surface," he ordered. "If we cannot break free, we will burn them alive." The gun crews obeyed. The Sovereign Wrath's primary cannon turned toward Juno 3, its massive energy core charging. But then, something unexpected happened. The cannon shut down. Tarvok's eyes widened. "What?" A deep chuckle echoed through the bridge's speakers. A human voice, smug, confident, and infuriatingly calm. "Hey there, Tarvok. Having a rough day?" Tarvok's claws scraped against his throne, his body stiffening. "Who is this?" "Just a guy who doesn't like bullies." Tarvok didn't understand what was happening until he glanced at the tactical display. The humans had done something unthinkable. A small group of boarding shuttles had latched onto Sovereign Wrath's engineering bay, and in the chaos of battle, his security teams had been too overwhelmed to stop them. Now, humans were inside his ship, inside his control systems. Tarvok slammed a fist onto the control panel. "Seal off engineering. Flush them into space." "Yeah, about that," the human voice returned. "We've already overridden the locks. Also, did you know that if you reroute power from life support to weapons, there's a teeny tiny risk of a total core meltdown? Tarvok's stomach dropped. You wouldn't dare, he growled. Try me, the voice said. And then the lights flickered. Sovereign Wrath's primary cannon shut down completely. The weapons grid followed. Deck by deck, the entire ship was being hijacked. Tarvok had always assumed humanity was reckless, that they threw themselves into battle because they had no strategy. But this wasn't recklessness. This was surgical, brutal, and methodical warfare. Down in the engineering bay, Lieutenant Sarah Connors wiped a streak of oil from her cheek, grinning at the panicked alien crew members around her. The Kevlani were taller, stronger, and better equipped. But right now, none of that mattered. Because humans cheated. Sarah adjusted her comms. Command, we've got control of their primary power grid, awaiting orders. Admiral Vasquez's voice came through, crisp and ruthless. Tarvok thinks we're desperate. Let's remind him who the real predators are. Sarah smirked. The Sovereign Wrath, once the most feared ship in the Kevlani fleet, was now under human control, and the real fight had just begun. Tarvok's fists clenched so tightly, his claws nearly punctured his own palm. His warship, the pride of the Kevlani Dominion, was now a crippled beast, its weapons silenced, its power grid in enemy hands. And worst of all, it had taken only minutes for the humans to do it. The bridge was in chaos. Officers barked overloading systems reports. Security feeds flashed with scenes of Kevlani warriors being cut down, and warning klaxons howled like dying animals. The impossible was happening. The prey had become the predator. Tarvok rose from his command throne, towering over his subordinates. Enough! His voice was a snarl of pure fury. Prepare for manual override. I want full control back now! Vorkal, his second-in-command, hesitated, his claws flexed in unease. Supreme Warlord, the humans have compromised our reactor failsafes. If we attempt a system reboot... Tarvok grabbed Vorkal by the throat and lifted him off the ground with ease. The bridge fell silent. Do you think I fear these creatures? Tarvok growled, his yellow eyes burning with hatred. I have exterminated species that dared defy us. I have bathed in the blood of those who thought they were clever. Vorkal gurgled, struggling against his grip. I will not be humiliated by them. Tarvok dropped Vorkal to the floor. The officer gasped, rubbing his bruised throat. Find a way to purge them from my ship, Tarvok ordered, or I will purge you. But even as he issued the command, he knew. This was different. Humans weren't just fighting. They were winning. Admiral Vasquez stood with arms folded, eyes locked on the tactical display. The situation was shifting faster than even she had expected. The Kevlani fleet, once an overwhelming force, was crippled, its ships unable to maneuver, its flagship now under human control. Status report on the boarding teams. Alpha Team controls engineering, Commander Rourke replied. Bravo is pushing towards the bridge. Resistance is heavy, but the Kevlani are fighting like cornered animals. Vasquez nodded. That was expected. The Kevlani were warriors, genetically engineered for domination, raised from birth to believe they were superior. But they weren't used to losing. And that was exactly why humanity was about to destroy them. She activated her comms. Lieutenant Connors, do you have control of their reactor systems? A crackle, then Sarah's voice came through, grinning even over comms. Oh, we've got more than that. Their ship is basically ours now. We can shut them down, or blow them up. Vasquez smiled. Let's not waste the opportunity. Push forward. The bridge is the priority. Roger that. We'll make it quick. Vasquez turned back to Rourke. How are our own losses? He hesitated. Heavier than we'd like, but acceptable. Vasquez exhaled. Every casualty stung. But this was a war they couldn't afford to lose. Because the Kevlani? They wouldn't have hesitated to slaughter every last human on Juno 3. And now, they were paying for that arrogance. Sarah Connors ducked behind a half-melted bulkhead, her pulse rifle smoking as she dropped another Kevlani warrior. Their bodies were thicker, stronger, their reflexes faster. But humans? Humans had adaptation. And right now, Sarah and her team were adapting the hell out of this fight. "Move! We're 3 hulls from the bridge," she barked. The Marines pushed forward, clearing rooms with brutal efficiency. Kevlani officers tried to rally, but their coordination was falling apart. They weren't used to this kind of relentless aggression. One of the aliens roared, lunging at Sarah with a plasma-forged blade the size of her leg. She sidestepped, slammed the butt of her rifle into its jaw, then jammed a shock blade into the gap in its armor. The Kevlani collapsed, convulsing as electricity fried its nervous system. "That's for Earth, asshole," Sarah muttered. A burst of static hit her comms. "Lieutenant, we're getting reports that the Kevlani fleet is trying to regain control of their phase drives." Sarah cursed. If they managed to escape, they'd bring reinforcements. They had to end this. Now she turned to her squad. "We need to take the bridge. No holding back." Her Marines grinned. They knew what she meant. This wasn't just an infiltration mission anymore. This was an execution. Tarvok braced himself against the command throne, eyes darting between his failing tactical screens. The humans were coming. A deep, primal part of him. A part he had never acknowledged, felt something he had never felt before. Not anger, not hatred, fear. Because for the first time in his life, Tarvok was realizing something terrifying. Humans didn't fight like warriors. They fought like monsters. And they weren't here to win. They were here to break him. The Sovereign Wrath's bridge was a battlefield, the last stronghold of a dying empire. Tarvok stood tall, his claws slick with blood, both human and Kevlani. His elite honor guard fought beside him, their roars shaking the walls as they clashed with the relentless, merciless invaders. But the humans? They weren't slowing down. They moved with a ferocity that defied logic, their tactics brutal, their weapons efficient. They had lost many, but every fallen Marine only seemed to make the others fight harder. Tarvok gritted his teeth, deflecting a human's shock blade with his wrist guard before slamming a fist into their skull. The soldier crumpled, but 2 more took their place. They never stopped. And then, the doors at the rear of the bridge blew open. Sarah Connors stepped through the smoke, pulse rifle raised, her eyes locked onto Tarvok. Her armor was scorched, blood smeared across her face, some hers, some not. But her expression? Calm, controlled, like she already knew how this was going to end. Tarvok felt his warriors hesitate. They could feel it too, the shift, the inevitability. Humanity had already won. Sarah's team had fought tooth and nail to reach the bridge. The Kevlani fought like cornered beasts, their desperation making them even more dangerous. But humans knew how to weaponize desperation. Sarah had one goal: cut off the enemy's escape. Juno 3 had already crippled the Kevlani's phase drives, but that wouldn't last forever. If Tarvok's forces escaped, they'd regroup, come back stronger. They needed to finish this. Her comms crackled. "Connors, Vasquez here. We've intercepted enemy transmissions. They're calling for reinforcements from the Dominion's core fleets. If they get through?" "They won't," Sarah cut in. She looked at her team. Every single one of them was battered, exhausted, wounded, but they weren't broken, and they wouldn't stop. "One last push," Sarah said. "We take the bridge. We end this war." Her Marines didn't need orders. They just nodded and charged. Tarvok locked eyes with Sarah. For the first time in his life, he understood something he had never considered before. Humans weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting because they enjoyed tearing apart their enemies. A sickening realization crept up his spine. Had he been wrong? Had his people, his entire empire, miscalculated the nature of humanity? They had thought of humans as weak, undisciplined savages. But looking into Sarah Connor's cold, predatory gaze, Tarvok saw the truth. They were the monsters. And the Kevlani? They were just another species doomed to extinction. Sarah tilted her head. "What's the matter, Warlord?" she asked, stepping forward. "Not used to being on the other end of an execution?" Tarvok snarled, lunging forward. Bang! Sarah's pulse rifle fired once, a single clean shot to the knee. Tarvok collapsed, roaring in pain. His warriors staggered, their confidence shattered. Sarah moved in, pressing her rifle under his jaw. "Surrender," she ordered, "or we burn the rest of your fleet out of the sky." Tarvok breathed heavily, his massive frame trembling. For the first time in his life, he had no options left. Tarvok had never felt this before. Not on the battlefields of Vor-Kesh, where he had personally crushed the last resistance of the Zalorans. Not during the culling of Theta Prime, when his fleet burned an entire world to ash. Not even when he had stood before the Kevlani High Dominion, earning the title of Supreme Warlord. This was different. This was defeat. Sarah Connor stood over him, her pulse rifle firmly pressed under his jaw, finger hovering over the trigger. Around them, the bridge was silent. The battle had ended in minutes once their leader fell. His warriors, his once mighty warriors, stood motionless, weapons lowered, their bodies tense with uncertainty. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Humans were supposed to beg. They were supposed to break. They were supposed to die screaming. And yet here he was, on his knees. Sarah tilted her head slightly, studying him like a scientist examining an insect. "You know," she said, voice casual, almost conversational, "we could kill every last one of you. Right now. No negotiations. No mercy." Tarvok's mandibles twitched in anger, but he said nothing. Because she was right. The entire fleet was compromised. Their dreadnoughts, their strike craft, their superior technology, all of it meant nothing when humans didn't play by the rules. Sarah's grip on her rifle didn't waver. "But I want you to understand something." She leaned in close, voice dropping into a quiet, deadly whisper. "We don't just want to win. We want you to suffer forever thinking you could beat us." Tarvok's yellow eyes widened. That was the difference. Other species fought for dominance. Other species fought for survival. But humans, they fought to make sure you never tried again. Tarvok's breathing was ragged. He forced himself to meet her gaze, his pride screaming at him to fight, to lash out, to die like a warrior. But that's what they wanted. That's what she wanted. If he died now, his species was over. If he fought back, they would wipe out the entire Kevlani fleet, and the High Dominion would never recover. Tarvok closed his eyes. His fists clenched so tightly his claws drew blood. And then, slowly, he lowered his head. Surrender. A sound of shock rippled through his remaining warriors. A Supreme Warlord had never surrendered in battle. Sarah pulled back, lowering her rifle just a fraction. She tapped her comms. "Vasquez, it's done." A pause. Then the Admiral's voice came through, sharp and satisfied. "Good. Secure the bridge. We take full control of their fleet." Sarah smirked. She turned back to Tarvok. "Congratulations, Supreme Warlord." She gestured at the battlefield. "Your people get to live, but make no mistake." She knelt down, lowering her voice to a whisper again. "If any of your kind ever think about trying this again, we won't just destroy your fleet. We'll come for your homeworld, and we'll turn the Kevlani race into nothing but a bad memory." Tarvok swallowed hard, his pride burning inside him. This wasn't just a loss. This was annihilation, delayed only by human amusement. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. Sarah stood up and turned to her Marines. Lock them down and prep the fleet for full occupation. The war wasn't just over. It had never been a war to begin with. Just another species learning the hard way. You don't trap humanity. Humanity traps you. The bridge of the sovereign wrath was eerily silent now. Human soldiers moved with calculated precision, securing every Kevlani officer, confiscating weapons, and locking down the last remnants of resistance. The once mighty warriors of the Dominion stood motionless, their heads low, their claws twitching, but useless. They had never known defeat like this, because no species had ever done this to them before. Sarah Connors stood near the Central Command throne, watching as her Marines methodically dismantled the enemy's last defenses. A Kevlani admiral, one of Tarvok's top officers, tried to lunge for a hidden blade, but a Marine smashed a rifle butt into his face before he could even grip the handle. Pathetic. Sarah tapped her comms. Bridge secured, awaiting final orders. Vasquez's voice came through, crisp and controlled. Good work, Connors. Juno 3 has full fire control over the Kevlani fleet. We're preparing for the next phase. Sarah's smirk faded. Next phase. She knew what that meant. The war wasn't just about winning. It was about making sure no one ever tried this again. She turned to the once proud warlord, still on his knees, still silent. Tarvok. He didn't look up. Your people just became ours. A ripple of anger flashed through his body, but he didn't move. Because he knew. The Kevlani had no more options. The Dominion had sent its best fleet, its strongest warships, and they had been reduced to wreckage in mere hours. Now, humanity had control of their technology, their strategies, their weaknesses. And worst of all, they had control of him. Sarah crouched in front of him, her voice dropping to a whisper. Tell me, Supreme Warlord, what do you think happens next? Tarvok's breathing was shallow, his mind racing. Surrender meant enslavement. Resistance meant genocide. Escape was impossible. He had never faced a species that refused to leave an enemy intact. Other empires had defeated their foes and taken tribute. Humans didn't take tribute. They took everything. Sarah's eyes were cold, calculating. I'll tell you what happens next, she continued. You give the order to your fleet. Every remaining Kevlani vessel lowers their shields, surrenders control, hands over every single Dominion secret we can use. Tarvok gritted his teeth. And if I refuse? Sarah's smile was cruel. Then we test the limits of how long it takes to erase your species. You would commit genocide? Tarvok hissed, a flicker of old pride rising. Sarah let out a soft laugh. You think you're special? You think we haven't done it before? Tarvok's stomach dropped. That was the moment he understood. Humanity didn't fight wars like the Kevlani. They fought wars like apex predators. They wiped out competition. They broke enemies so thoroughly that they would never rise again. The Kevlani had assumed that human mercy was weakness. They had been wrong. It was a choice. A gift humanity only gave if they saw a reason to. And right now? Sarah was looking at Tarvok as if she were deciding whether or not his species deserved to exist. He exhaled slowly. His pride screamed at him to fight, to resist, to die like a warrior. But his duty whispered something else. Survival. Survival at any cost. Tarvok lifted his head. His voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. I will give the order. A pulse of triumph flickered across Sarah's expression. She tapped her comms. Vasquez, it's done. The Supreme Warlord is ready to comply. A pause. Then the Admiral's voice. Well done, Lieutenant. Secure the surrender. Then bring him to me. Sarah stood up, tilting her head slightly. You made the right choice. But the way she said it? Tarvok wasn't sure if she meant it as a mercy or a warning. Because one thing was very, very clear now. Humanity had been underestimated. And now? The Kevlani would never make that mistake again. The official surrender of the Kevlani fleet was broadcast across every surviving warship. Tarvok's voice, once filled with unshakable pride, now carried the weight of submission. His orders were clear: lower shields, deactivate weapons, and hand over command to the humans. And as the Kevlani Dominion's once mighty armada submitted, one brutal, undeniable truth became clear to everyone. The war was over. Not just this battle, not just this campaign, the entire war. And humanity had won. Admiral Vasquez stood with her arms crossed, watching the fleet fall in line. The once glorious dreadnoughts of the Kevlani Empire were now prizes of war, their fearsome war engines reduced to idle husks. And every single one of them? Now under human control. Vasquez exhaled, turning to Commander Rourke. Confirm all Kevlani vessels are secured. Rourke nodded. Aye, Admiral. The fleet has surrendered completely. Some minor resistance, but nothing we can't handle. Vasquez smirked. Good. And the Supreme Warlord? Rourke hesitated. Still on board the Sovereign Wrath. Lieutenant Connors is bringing him in now. Vasquez glanced at the holographic displays one last time before giving a short nod. Prepare the War Council. It's time to decide what happens next. Sarah Connors walked through the dimly lit corridors, Tarvok in tow. His hands were bound in military-grade restraints, his once majestic armor now scarred and stained from battle. His steps were heavy, his posture slumped, not from injury, but from defeat. Human Marines flanked him on either side, rifles at the ready. He wasn't just a prisoner. He was a symbol. Sarah didn't bother speaking as they walked, because she didn't need to. The silence was worse than any words. They passed by Kevlani prisoners, warriors who had once been the terror of the galaxy, now reduced to hollow-eyed captives. One of them spat at the floor as Tarvok passed, a sign of disgust, of betrayal. Even his own kind saw him as a failure now. Tarvok didn't react, not because he didn't care, but because, deep down, he agreed. He had spent his entire life believing in the unbreakable supremacy of the Kevlani Empire. But now he was being marched through his own warship like cattle. The humans had stripped away everything, his fleet, his honor, his very purpose. And worst of all, they hadn't done it with brute force. They had done it with strategy, with patience, with terrifying precision. The humans had played the long game, and he had never seen it coming. Sarah led him into the holding cell. It was cold, metallic, impersonal, fitting. She gestured to the Marines. Lock him down, maximum security. The soldiers shoved Tarvok inside, securing the restraints. He didn't resist. Sarah studied him for a moment before speaking. Do you understand now? Tarvok exhaled slowly. Understand what? Sarah leaned in. That this was never a war. Tarvok's mandibles twitched slightly. You expect me to believe this was anything else? Sarah smiled, but there was no humor in it. You thought you were fighting for conquest. We were fighting for survival. She tilted her head. And the thing about humans? She lowered her voice. When we fight for survival, we don't stop until we own everything. Tarvok's breathing hitched, because he believed her. The war was over, but somehow he knew humanity was just getting started. Tarvok sat motionless in the cold, metallic cell, staring at the floor. The weight of his defeat pressed against him like a crushing gravity, heavier than any battle wound he had ever endured. He was supposed to die with glory. He was supposed to take humanity's world and burn it to ash. He was supposed to stand victorious, his name written into history as the warlord who broke an upstart species beneath his heel. Instead, he was here, a prisoner, a cautionary tale, a failure. The worst part? The humans hadn't even truly fought him. They had outthought him. They had outmaneuvered him. They had let him believe he was winning, all while tightening the noose. He had walked right into their trap, and now his entire empire would suffer for it. The door to the holding cell hissed open. Tarvok didn't need to look up. He knew who it was. Sarah Connors, the human warrior who had led the attack on his ship. The woman who had spoken to him not as a conqueror, but as something worse, something colder, something crueler. A predator. She stepped inside, her boots clicking against the smooth floor. The cell was dim, but even in the half-light, her expression was clear, a mixture of curiosity and something else. Amusement. She was enjoying this. Sarah pulled up a chair and sat across from him. Casual, like this was just a friendly conversation. "You look like you've got a lot on your mind." Tarvok didn't answer. Sarah leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "I've seen this before, you know. Your kind always looks the same when they realize what just happened." His eyes flickered up. "My kind?" "The ones who think they're at the top of the food chain," she said smoothly. "You all make the same mistake. You think because you've been dominant for a few centuries, that it means you always will be." Tarvok's jaw clenched. Sarah smirked. "And then you meet us." Silence hung between them. She waited, watching him, studying him. Finally, Tarvok exhaled, his voice low. "What now?" Sarah's smirk widened. "That depends on how useful you are." Tarvok narrowed his eyes. "You plan to use me against my own people?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small data chip, twirling it between her fingers. "We already have everything we need," she said simply. "Your fleet is ours. Your war plans, ours. Your command structures, supply routes, planetary defenses." She tapped the data chip against her knee. "All ours." Tarvok's heart sank further. Sarah shrugged. "But you could still be useful, if you help us." Tarvok let out a deep, bitter laugh. "Help you?" He bared his teeth. "You truly believe I would betray my own people?" Sarah met his gaze, unfazed. "I think, deep down, you already know what's coming next." She leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper. "The Kevlani Dominion is finished." Tarvok's claws tightened into fists. "No," he growled. "Even if you crush our fleet, the Dominion will rebuild. Others will rise. Our homeworld still stands." Sarah smiled. "For now." The two words hit harder than a plasma blast. Tarvok's breathing hitched. Sarah's expression never changed. She let the words settle, let him fully grasp what they meant. Finally, she stood, tucking the data chip back into her pocket. "You have a choice, warlord." She turned toward the door, pausing just before stepping out. "You can cling to your pride and watch your people burn." She looked back over her shoulder, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Or you can help us, and maybe, just maybe, some of them will live." The door hissed shut behind her, leaving Tarvok alone in the dark. His breathing was slow, deep, because for the first time in his life, he was afraid, not for himself, but for his species. Because now he understood. The humans weren't just winning, they weren't just conquering, they were erasing him from history, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Tarvok sat alone in the cell, but the walls felt as if they were closing in. Sarah Connor's words echoed in his mind. The Kevlani Dominion is finished. Your people will burn. You can help us, or watch it all disappear. He had faced death countless times, on the battlefield, in the depths of space, in brutal ritual duels to prove his worth as a warlord. But this was worse than death. This was the slow, creeping realization that everything he had believed in was a lie. The Kevlani weren't superior. The Kevlani weren't invincible. They had never been the hunters. They had been prey all along, and humanity had simply been waiting for the right moment to strike. Admiral Vasquez stood before a holographic display of the captured Kevlani fleet. Her officers gathered around her. The mood in the room was intense, because now came the hard part. The war was over, but what came next would determine the future of humanity itself. Commander Rourke folded his arms. We should destroy them, every last one of them. Send a message that no one messes with Earth. Some officers murmured in agreement, others hesitated. Vasquez exhaled. That's one option. She turned toward Dr. Hayes, who had been studying Kevlani biological data for weeks. Thoughts? Vasquez asked. Hayes adjusted his glasses. The Kevlani are an empire built on conquest. If we just wipe them out, another species will rise to take their place. Maybe worse. So what? We let them live? Rourke scoffed. After what they did to us? Vasquez turned back to the hologram. She had spent her entire career preparing for this moment. And now she had to make the hardest decision of her life. How do you break an empire permanently? Her comms buzzed. Sarah Connor's voice came through. Admiral, Tarvok is thinking. He's not talking yet, but he's close. Vasquez smirked. Good, because she wasn't done with him yet. The door hissed open again. Tarvok didn't look up this time. He knew who it was. Sarah stepped inside, arms crossed. We need to talk. Tarvok remained silent. Sarah sighed. Still playing the proud warrior? Even when you know you've already lost? His mandibles twitched in irritation. Say what you came to say, human. Sarah pulled up a chair, sitting across from him. Here's the deal, warlord. She leaned forward, voice calm. Your fleet is gone. Your empire is crippled. Right now, my admiral is deciding whether to wipe out every last one of your people, or let them exist under our control. Tarvok's eyes narrowed. Control? Sarah nodded. A new order. One where your people no longer rule the stars. One where humanity calls the shots. Tarvok bared his teeth. You think my kind will submit? Sarah shrugged. I think it doesn't matter what they want. They don't have a choice. Silence. Sarah studied him. Then she delivered the final blow. Help us. Work with us. And maybe, just maybe, we'll let some of your kind live. Tarvok felt something deep inside him snap. They weren't just asking for surrender. They were demanding obedience. The Kevlani Dominion was dead, and he had to decide whether or not his people would die with it. Tarvok had never been a coward. He had fought wars, crushed rebellions, stood at the pinnacle of the Kevlani war machine. But as he sat in that cold, metallic cell, staring into Sarah Connor's ruthless eyes, he realized something terrifying. This wasn't a war anymore. This was the end of his species as he knew it. The Kevlani Dominion, once feared across the stars, was now nothing but a dying ember, its fate held in the hands of the very species they had tried to erase. And he? He was no longer a supreme warlord. He was a prisoner of history. He exhaled slowly, the words tasting like poison as they left his mouth. What do you want? Sarah's smirk was cold, victorious. She leaned back, arms crossed. Simple. Her voice was smooth, matter-of-fact, like a hunter explaining the rules to its prey. You will deliver a message to your people. You will tell them the Dominion is over. You will tell them that from this day forward, humanity runs the show." Tarvok's claws tightened into fists. "And if I refuse?" Sarah's smirk widened. "Then we wipe you out, slowly, one planet at a time, until there is nothing left of your kind but dust and regret." Tarvok felt his breathing quicken, rage boiling beneath the surface. But deep down, he knew the truth. This wasn't a choice. This was a sentence. The Kevlani had ruled with an iron fist for centuries, but now they would live on their knees, if they lived at all. And he? He would be remembered not as a warlord, but as the first Kevlani to bow. Slowly, painfully, Tarvok nodded. Sarah's smirk never faded. She tapped her comms. "Admiral Vasquez, our guest is ready to cooperate." A pause. Then Vasquez's voice came through, calm, assured. "Good, let's make history." The Kevlani surrender was broadcast across every known star system. Tarvok's voice, once filled with thunderous pride, now carried the weight of defeat as he uttered the words that would echo across the galaxy. "The war is over. The Dominion is no more. Humanity is our new master." Across Kevlani worlds, warriors dropped their weapons, eyes filled with shock, rage, and horror. On Earth and its colonies, celebrations erupted. The war was over. Humanity had not just survived, they had dominated. And as the last remnants of the Kevlani fleet were integrated into human control, one truth became clear to every species in the galaxy. Humanity had flipped the script. They had not been conquered. They had become the conquerors. And now, the galaxy belonged to them.